Hello and welcome back to A Drunk History Middle-earth. It is me, Chris, by myself today. Now, this is a bit of an odd episode. This is a little bonus. What happened with this one is I was doing the research for the episode I did with Kaya, which is about Shelob, Ungoliant and feminism, before it morphed into that. Now, stop me if you've heard this one before. I started doing research for something and I realised, hey, this is its own episode. And so what originally came from cosmic horror within Tolkien became a examination of haunted places in Middle-earth, which became Ered Gorgoroth and Nan Dungortheb, which then Kaya and I decided that feminism in Tolkien was too good of an opportunity to pass up. And you should have already heard that episode with it being out already. And so I'm doing a little solo deep dive into Nan Dungortheb. Now I'm recording this as I'm also discovering that more than likely Sauron is more episodes than I intended, and it's always the same with me. A bit of hubris on my part. Started doing the research for Sauron. I thought the first age by itself was just going to be an episode by itself, second age, third age, and beyond. Then I've discovered that writing about Tevildo and Thu the Necromancer has quite a lot there. There's quite a lot there, so I fully expect by the time Sauron's done, it's like a 5-6 part series. Which, makes sense considering it's the titular Lord of the Rings. Now, in terms of what's going on, not much of an update for you. I'm not sure when you'll hear this. It might be after Christmas, it might be beforehand. I'm basically just going to keep this as a wee little bonus episode that I can put out if research is taking a bit too long on a certain subject. So we shall see. Becca has just took our daughter to nursery. I am in the house with just Bomber for company, our dog. And we're going, right. So as a usual reminder, if you want to come and hang out with us, with me and some other lovely Tolkien fans, Becca doesn't use Discord, I'm afraid. Come and chat to us on the Discord. You can find the links in our social media. We have lots of crack. We talk about lore, just general shit. And also, as well, for the first time ever, if you want to come and join, I've got a guild in World of Warcraft Classic. I'm playing that, the Fresh Anniversary Realms. I've got a guild called Forehead Kisses, and I managed to get the name Christopher. I'm a tank, and I managed to get my name, so yeah, I would have preferred Chris, because it's normally Christopher when I'm in trouble, but if I'm tanking in World of Warcraft, I'm generally in trouble anyway, because, it's fucking difficult. But yes, that is the social media stuff out of the way. Last one, also a reminder, if anybody is on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, or you're going to be in Germany in June next year, you come and see us at Tolkien Tag. Me and Becca will be there for a couple of days. We're going to pass through Amsterdam on our way there. We're going to get the ferry from Newcastle to Amsterdam and then drive over to Geldern in Germany. So if you want to come and meet us, you want to come and say hi, tell me if you're going to be at Tolkien Tag and I'll come and see you. It's just a nice way for us to say hello, because we've already arranged to meet up with people en route and people there as well. So it'll be nice to see some friends that we haven't perhaps met yet. I do talk to quite a lot of you regularly, but there's also people who I've never spoke to before who just out of the blue say, "Oh, it's like you're a friend and I don't know you," which is it's always an interesting one. Right, so let's move on to Nan Dungortheb. In the published Silmarillion, we have only really a couple of references to Nan Dungortheb, which is a shame because there is certain aspects of the Legendarium, which you'll have heard me talk about before. There's certain aspects of the Legendarium that I adore. They have captured my imagination. There's things like Cirith Ungol, Nan Dungortheb, Ered Gorgoroth, the nameless things under Moria, Tom Bombadil, like these Ungoliant, Shelob, like these unexplained things. And Nan Dungortheb is one of them. And Nan Dungortheb and Ered Gorgoroth kind of come hand in hand. And they've moved places geographically throughout Tolkien's writings. They weren't always where they are, which is, just north of Doriath. But they have always remained this terrible land. Oh, there's also the, is it Tolin Gowroth? which is the Isle of Werewolves, and Tarnufuin, the cursed forest where the vampires live. So it's all these dark places in Tolkien that capture my imagination precisely because there's not that much information on them, and that's by design, I assume. Although with Tolkien, you never really know. But it brushes it very, very lightly, just tickles the nutsack. It tickles the clitoris. It swipes delicately across the taint of cosmic horror. And, it doesn't go full rosebud on the cosmic horror, which I love. As you know by now, love cosmic horror. So, Nan Dungortheb captures my attention, and today is a solo episode, so we're going to get a bit nerdy, and I'm essentially going to talk about every time Nan Dungortheb is mentioned in the Legendarium, which I don't think it's the first time. I don't think I've done this before, actually. It might be the first time. So, we do know that Nan Dungortheb was always evil, and we know that most stories that Tolkien wrote agree that Ungoliant was in the valley. She had lots of sex, lots of kids, and then moved on to possibly the uttermost south. Sometimes she ate the kids and the creatures she mated with, and and that these creatures, these giant creatures in spider form that she then had mated with, were present in the valley since Autumno and Angband were delved. And I'm going to read a quote from when Ungoliant comes to Nan Dungortheb. Because of the horror that she bred there, for other foul creatures of spider form had dwelt there since the days of the delving of Angband, and she mated with them and devoured them. And even after Ungoliant herself departed, and went whither she would into the forgotten south of the world, her offspring abode there and wove their hideous webs. Now, call back to the Kaya episodes, the purposeful use of the language there about, the way she's mated and why it's so terrible. Then we have another quote, filling the ravines with her dreadful gloom, and there still, when she had passed away, her foul offspring lurked and wove their evil nets, and the thin waters that spilled from Ered Gorgoroth were defiled, and perilous to drink, for the hearts of those that tasted them were filled with shadows of madness and despair. All living things else shunned that land, and an Noldor would pass through Nan Dungortheb, only at great need, by paths near to the border of Doriath and furthest from the haunted hills. And there we see again that, so we see that the water actually turns you mad. Now, we know that Morgoth's taint, pause for Becca's laughter, Morgoth's taint was in it was in the water itself, and it was in the planet itself. Could it be that this was just stronger here? We don't know. Was it something else entirely that was the reason for it? Who knows? It's fascinating. I just wish there was more about it. I think there's also some element of the water in Mordor tasting bad as well, so it might have been a parallel there. I think when Sam and Frodo stopped for a drink, the water's tasted bitter or oily or something. But then we also, the next reference we have to Nan Dungortheb is when Arathel, sister of Turgon, king of Gondolin, is travelling in the area. Her companions get lost in the shadows and chased by giant spiders, and they lose Arathel, which leads to her meeting Eorl, I think. So it seems like these spiders may have been almost equal, maybe even some greater than Shelob, because they all seem to have the ability for their shadows to restrain or hinder people. And this is something that me and Kaya talked about, is that Shelob was noted for not having the same power for her webs to have the same kind of shadow kind of power that her mother's webs had. And it seems like these ones did. So could it be possibly that it's a case of it's just in the first age you were allowed to do a lot more things you weren't able to do in the third age, and that's a world in decline again. But the quote for this is, "Then Arathel turned back and sought the dangerous road between the haunted valleys of Ered Gorgoroth and the north fences of Doriath. And as they drew near to the evil region of Nan Dungortheb, the riders became enmeshed in shadows, and Arathel strayed from her companions and was lost. They sought long for her in vain, fearing she had been ensnared, or had drunk from the poisoned streams of that land. But the fell creatures of Ungoliant that dwelt in the ravines were aroused and pursued them, and they hardly escaped with their lives." So there we get the mention of the poisoned streams, and don't drink the water, which is spooky. Moving on, we move on to the tale of Beren and Luthien, which, geez Louise, writing and recording the Sauron episode, he is so heavily entwined in that story that I cover it from about 6 different angles, just writing about like bloody Tevildo, Prince of Cats, and Thu the Necromancer, which are precursors to Sauron. But when Beren makes his way to Doriath, now this is the first time that most people properly kind of conceptualize Nan Dungortheb, because it's mentioned, but it sees the effect it has on people. And I wonder if, there might be a case to be made that it's kind of like coming back from war, but yeah, you can make up your own mind. Terrible was his southward journey. Sheer were the precipices of Ered Gorgoroth, and beneath their feet were shadows that laid before the rising of the moon. Beyond lay the wilderness of Dungortheb, where the sorcery of Sauron and the power of Melian came together, and horror and madness walked. The spiders, their spiders of the fell race of Ungoliant abode, spinning their unseen webs in which all living things were snared, and monsters wandered there that were born in the long dark before the sun, hunting silently with many eyes. No food for elves or men was there in that haunted land, but death only. That journey is not accounted least among the great deeds of Beren, but he spoke of it to no one after, lest the horror return to his mind, and none know how he found a way, and so came by paths that no man nor elf ever dared to tread to the borders of Doriath. So as I pointed out in the Sauron episodes as well previously, is that it's amazing to think that the sorcery of Sauron and the power of Melian mingle together somehow, and it creates like this chaotic eldritch horrors in the area because of that. Like, and it says like because the power of these two makes that madness walk. Now I take that quite literally. It's that it's almost like, and again, it makes me think again, just like the battle of Sauron and Finrod, is that it's like a tiny microcosm again of the Ainu Lindale, like the discord creating things that were slightly unintended or chaotic from it. And then, we've got, so from this as well, like I also like the idea that evil is created that isn't just on the side of Sauron and Morgoth, that it's just evil for evil's sake. Like Ungoliant and Shelob are just like lust and greed incarnate, like they just live to consume. They don't have an agenda other than to eat and feed and mate. That's all they do. That is the published Silmarillion, but I wanted to go back to earlier versions of the tale when I was doing my research as well. So we've got a lot of stuff in the Book of Lost Tales and stuff like that, because there's other hints sprinkled here and there, just a little bit of sprinkling of salt of something else, and that is what I like, and that is beautiful to me. So there's an early, so this is early enough in the Legendarium for those who are familiar that the elves are referred to as gnomes in a longer poem. So if you're not overly familiar, I'll just do a brief recap. That early in Tolkien's writings, elves used to be called gnomes. Sindarin language in its earliest forms was called Gnomish. Quenya was still another language, but it was spelled Qenya. And there were some other differences, like originally it was all an ancient past told on an island that was told by elves to a mariner who found his way to an island. And this is around that time that we're talking about this. This is like the fables, where it was much more fairy tale before it became concrete Middle-earth history like we know. So in this much longer poem, in a much different style of events, it's actually Turin Turambar is around there, because he wanders the land looking for death after the death of Beleg Strongbow. So anyone who knows the story of the children of Húrin knows that Beleg dies because of at the hands of Turin, and in this version of things, Beleg has died, and Turin wanders the land looking for death, like he throws himself into all the dangers he can. And this poem is written in alliterative verse, which it's not quite my my rhyming couplets, but we deal and we move. Thus reach they the roots and the ruinous feet of those hoary hills that Hithum girdle, the shaggy pine woods of the shadowy mountains, where twain enfolded phantom twilight, and dim mazes dark and holy, in Nan Dungortheb, where nameless gods have shrouded shrines in shadow's secrets. More old than Morgoth or the ancient lords, the golden gods of the guarded west. But the ghostly dwellers of that grey valley hindered nor hurt them, and they held their course. With creeping flesh and quaking limb, yet laughter at whiles with lingering echo, as distant mockery of demon voices, their harsh and hollow in the hushed twilight. Flinding fancied fell unwholesome, as that leering laughter lost and dreadful, that ring in the rocks in the ruthless hour, a Beleg slaughter, 'tis Bauglia's voice, that dogs us darkly with deadly scorn. He shuddered thought, but the shreds of fear and black foreboding were banished utterly, when they clomb the cliffs and crumbling rocks that walled the veil of watchful evil. So this caught my attention, because Nan Dungortheb survived into the published Silmarillion, but it didn't have any mention of these nameless gods and shadowed shrines that are said to be older than the Valar. So it said it was older than the golden gods of the guarded west, which i.e. the Valar. So given that this is also a possible origin of Ungoliant as well, that if you remember in some versions of the tale, the Valar, we have no fucking clue what Ungoliant is. As I covered in her episode, there's multiple origins for her. It's fascinating to think that the turn that the Legendarium could have taken is that it's just so cool to think that there might have been other Ungoliant-like creatures living there, and maybe that's why even she was attracted to the place. She knew she'd be amongst her own kind, not necessarily spiders, but just creatures of the other, that from outside air, from the gaps of reality, void creatures, space creatures, maybe. I should mention quickly as well, Nan Dungortheb and Nan Dungorthin is just an evolution of the term. It was called Dumgorthin, and then it became Dungortheb. But there's also the mention of the ghostly demonic dwellers that watch and laugh at the travellers as they overcome by fear. And I just think that's lovely and gothic and spooky. I mean, last night, for example, one of my favourite films that spooks me every time I watch it, it doesn't wear off, is The Woman in Black. It just proper gets me. And I like that idea of that gothic horror of them just kind of the watchful malice. And I don't know why, and I have no idea why I do this, right? This is 100% just Chris being Chris. When we think of these nameless gods, and we hear about these nameless gods wandering a valley, I get pictures in my mind of the Native American stories of the Wendigo. Cannot tell you why. I know that they're spirits and cannibals and that, but a Wendigo is spooky enough to me that I can just swap that in my head and say, yes, that's what I'm thinking of now. So, nameless gods older than the Valar. In Chris's canon, in Chris's head, it's these giant, emaciated, animal-headed creatures of the Wendigo. Fuck knows why, but there we are. An insight into my psyche. So Christopher Tolkien mentions that his dad went back and forth on where to place Nan Dungortheb, or as it was called at the time, Nan Dungorthin, which meant the land of the dark idols. And in the earliest drafts it was called a dark land, and gloomy and foreboding, and dread wandered beneath its lowering trees. Eventually he settled on the valley being at the foot of Ered Gorgoroth, the Mountains of Terror. Now, this one makes me laugh because Ered Gorgoroth, so Ered means mountains in Sindarin, and Gorgor meaning extreme tower, extreme terror, horror, or fear. So similarly with Nan Dungortheb, there's the Valley of Dreadful Death with the same element, where we've got Nan for valley, then Gor for horror. But this makes me laugh because you've got Ered Gorgoroth, Nan Dungortheb. So we now know that the element for fear or horror or terror is Gor. Okay? So that essentially means that Tolkien got to name in Ered Gorgoroth and thought, how do I make this scarier if it's just called Ered Gor? And he thought, fuck it, I'll just repeat it. So, linguistically, if you translate Gorgoroth, it just means horror. It's just mountain horror. Which sounds like a Hawaiian resort, actually. I want to go to mountain horror. So yeah, just Gorgoroth is a bit of a, makes me laugh now, knowing that to get from terror to extreme terror, you just repeat it, and that's how you get there. Probably not as funny to you as it is to me, but I don't see you putting in all this research, so I'll laugh at what I like to. Thank you. And as I mentioned, the older name was Nan Dungortheb, as the land of it was described as a land of dark forests east of Artenor, where on a wooded mountain were hidden idols sacrificed to by some evil tribe of renegade men. Dum, D-U-M, meaning secret, not to be spoken, especially of bad things, and Dungort as an evil idol. Now, I'm going to shout out to one of the Discord members here, Skjolmo, a lovely, I think he's Danish, a lovely Scandinavian fella, because I had to chase down issue 11 of the Palmer Elder Lamberon from 1917 to get to that quote, to verify it. And lo and behold, I thought, I'll just check the Discord because we've got a resources channel for like rare shit we have. Yay! It turns out my hunch was correct. He'd uploaded it. He'd uploaded a few versions, and that issue number 11 was correct, that one. So I was able to go and see a copy of the source. So yeah, Skjolmo, you absolute fucking hero. Thank you. In the book, The Lost Road and Other Writings, there's early versions of the Elvish languages in the etymology section. And Nan Dungortheb is mentioned there and called Nan Dungortheb, where Dun means black colour, dark colour. So it becomes, again, the Valley of Black Terror. And the valley crops up again in the early tale of Tinuviel. And this is also one of the early tales where Tevildo, Prince of Cats for Sauron, and Thu the Necromancer, they crop up as well. So, like, the tale of Tinuviel, i.e. Beren and Luthien, that crops up. Like, you can see a lot of the evolution of Tolkien's works through this. So, when Beren and Luthien are escaping orcs after they steal a Silmaril, they pass through Ered Gorgoroth, which at this point is called the Shadowy Mountains, I think. And other times, sometimes when Tolkien, in these earlier versions, talks about the Shadowy Mountains, he's either talking about Ered Gorgoroth or Ered Wethrin. And Ered Wethrin are just mountains facing the land of Hithlum. But don't get too caught up under the geography here because, as I mentioned, it moves stuff around and sometimes there's contradictions. I'm sorry for anyone who's just triggered by hearing the team sound there. So, especially with first age stuff, like, don't worry too much about the geography, right? All you need to remember is that the big spiders and eldritch horrors were found in the Horrible Mountains and the Horrible Valley. And the quote from Christopher Tolkien's notes on his father's drafts are, Beren and Luthien escape to the Shadowy Mountains but become lost and bewildered by the dreads of Nan Dungortheb. And are hunted by phantoms and snared at last by the great spiders. Huan rescues them and guides them down Sirion. In the Book of Lost Tales, this is slightly expanded on how Huan rescued them. It was just good old divine intervention. And so the passage reads, one even at dusk, the Valar brought him to a glade in that northward region of Artenor that was called afterwards Nan Dungortheb, the land of the dark idols. But that is a matter that concerns not this tale. Howbeit was even then a dark land and gloomy and foreboding, and dread wandered beneath its lowering trees, no less even than in Tal Fuin. And those two elves, Tinuviel and Beren, were lying therein, weary and without hope. And Tinuviel wept, but Beren was fingering his knife. And then Huan chucks Luthien onto his back and tells Beren to run alongside him, and that's how they're rescued. Also note there that Beren was an elf at one point. We also get a description of Nan Dungortheb in the rhyming couplet version of the tale of Tinuviel, which describes the valley as well as the cursed forest where the vampires live. Beyond was deadly Nightshade's hold. In Tar Nu Fuin, fastness grim, where sun was sick and moon was dim. Later, the line describing... Right, that was the end of the poem. I then started to read my note in rhyming couplets. Fantastic effort, Chris. Later, the line describing Dungortheb was changed, and it ended up as we heard there, which was Dungortheb where all ways were dead. And the original line was, to the north there lay the land of dread, whence only evil pathways led. So we take it from evil pathways to where all ways were dead, which is an interesting, weird little change. And yeah, we're coming towards the end here. There's only one really more interesting tidbit to say. So in the Book of Lost Tales, Nan Dungortheb just gets described as a no man's land between the Girdle of Melian and Ered Gorgoroth, which kind of tracks as like originally that's what it would have been. I think when we get to the end version, it would have started as that before Morgoth fucked it up, but nobody, like, as in, nobody wanted to go there. It was a no land. It might as well be a black hole, because you wouldn't expect someone to go in there and come back out. But in the last one for me is that in the book The War of the Jewels, it said that clouds and darkness would creep down from almost the fences of Doriath from Nan Dungortheb, which that freaked me out a little bit more. Can you imagine being like an elf on guard in the north of Doriath, and you see the clouds and the fog and darkness rolling in, and just with elf eyes as well, because they're so keen, just seeing like skittering creatures, skittering, lurking figures slightly just inside the clouds, like that you can't see them clearly, but you know that they're there and that they're hungry and they're watching you and they're waiting for anyone who gets caught too far north, and that they're going to grab them. And that absolutely shit me up. But no, that's all I have for you. That is all I have for you, really. I just wanted to look at a cool place in Middle-earth, and so I have. It scares me. It freaks me out, just like lots of the cosmic horror stuff. And I thought it'd be a different type of episode for me to go through and actually just drag out all the literature on it, because there's not enough to do much else. Tolkien didn't write too much about it. I wish he did. And inevitably, there might be something that comes out after this that I missed, and it's just one of those things. But yeah. So yeah, let me know how you found this episode. It's going to be a little shorter one, so this will be a filler or a bonus episode somewhere along the way. I hope you have a fantastic day wherever you are, and I will catch you next episode with whatever that is about. Bye!